equal. He's not even thinking about women. I mean, it's not even crossing his mind. He might have thought about slaves, slave men, basically, but he's not thinking about women in any kind of way. So we don't see the revolution really responding, to or dealing with women in any kind of way. I do want you to know that though there were women of this era who they saw it themselves, they saw the revolutionary dynamic, they saw this moment of change, they saw the suggestion of equality. And so, they were willing to maybe try to promote that if they possibly could. And one of the most famous persons doing this was a woman by the name of Abigail Adams. Now, she is Nee Smith. Nee Smith, I don't know if you guys ever seen it. So her name was Abigail Smith. She was born Abigail Smith. And I just want to tell you her story a little bit because she's like at least the suggestion of, the potential of the revolution in the way that it could impact women. She was born in 1744 into a family in Massachusetts. I think they lived in the general area south of Boston. Her father was a Puritan minister, so she was raised in very much the Puritan tradition. Her father was college educated, her brothers were college educated. And I think that Abigail just simply got caught up in the dynamic of that process. And although there were no schools for women at that time at all, she simply was given the books that her brothers had, that her father had, and encouraged too. I mean, it wasn't just that she wanted to do this, but there was encouragement on the part of her family. And she became probably one of the most learned women in America. So what you mean by that is she didn't get to go to school, right? So she had to do it on her own. She's autodidact in terms of learning. So she's learned then. So it means she learned herself, of course. But she'd be extraordinarily intelligent woman and very learned. Now she was also ambitious. She wanted to be somebody. And of course, this is a time of American ambition generally, where Americans are beginning to assert themselves in a variety of different ways. But she knew, she was practical, and she knew the only way that she could really advance herself was to attach her wagon to some man on the make. And I've got to tell you, the man that finally won her heart was not a man who would bring her flowers and candy and stuff like that, but a man who brought her books, and his name was John Adams. John Adams, of course, himself, a very ambitious Massachusetts man. I think he is actually from Quincy proper, south of Boston. He became a lawyer. He became a son of liberty, very deeply engaged, of course, in the protest, the rebellion, and then ultimately independence. Writer and signer of the Declaration of Independence. One of our first ambassadors. He will go on to be Vice President of the United States and President of the United States. So, clearly, when she chose her man, she chose the way that she chose very, very well in this particular regard. Now, one thing that's intriguing, they do reflect sort of the basic reality of what relations between husband and wife in those days. So, when they married, I think John was 25, if I'm not mistaken, and Abigail was quite a bit younger. And that's sort of like I told you, women are getting married somewhere around 16 years of age or something like that. So there's that differential. And what that meant was you have men who married girls, and it creates a foundation of relative inequality, even though over time, of course, the girl became a woman. One thing unique about their relationship, and it does seem to be very much loving. I mean, this is a serious companionate, love-based relationship. So we don't want to be cynical about that part of it at all. But it does seem to be relatively egalitarian. So that means that John, he realized his wife was super smart, super intelligent, and he listened to her, and he used her as a sounding board, and he used her as a guide. They wrote letters to each other endlessly. There's volumes of their correspondence because they were apart often, and they're endlessly writing each other. And the volumes are both just terribly interesting in terms of like the commentary on just general life or in the relationship. And by the way, they got pretty risque with each other periodically, a little bit. And of course, they couldn't sext in those days. I don't know what you do, the equivalent of sexting through letter, but something like that. They clearly loved each other in a kind of deep sort of way. And I'm just going to tell you one little piece of one little letter that was sent. So John was away doing the Declaration of Independence, and they're sending letters are going back and forth, of course. And so John's telling what's going on, and Abigail sends him this letter, which has this incredible line. He says, "Dear John, as you men are fomenting and creating this new nation, of course, I hope that you will," and here's our famous line, "remember the ladies, remember the ladies." Not to make it more powerful, we wanted to say remember the women, but she said remember the ladies, essentially. And she put a little bit of a joke in it too. She said, if you forget the ladies, then we may rise up in a rebellion that makes your little thing look like nothing, you know. So a little bit of a threat, and of course that was just the playful banter between the two of them. But I think she was very sincere, you know, that she wanted those who were creating this nation to remember the women, you know, that they were part of the equation and that they should be considered in a very serious kind of way. And I don't recall how John responded. Probably he would respond like, you know, I want to remember you, honey, but I've got a bunch of sexists here who don't even think anything about women. But here's what I want you to know about Abigail Adams. She became a proponent for women's rights. And I have to tell you, just, you know, lived her own life, of course, had her children. One of her daughters had breast cancer. There's quite a bit of documentation for this. And can you imagine a woman having breast cancer at that time and a surgery while she was awake to try to, I think it did ultimately kill her, but, you know, living through the toughness of just being a woman, a mother, of course, a wife, and coming in during this period. But over time, she began to kind of promote certain women's causes. And because she was a prominent person, you know, and well known, and ultimately the wife of a president, she had something of a voice. And the things that she promoted education for women. She was very much dedicated to the cause that there should be educational opportunities for women. And although it's going to take some time, we kind of consider her, you know, one of the founding mothers that will move to the ultimate establishment of women's colleges in America. I'm pretty sure the very first women's college in America was not until 1834, so that's sometime after her death. And that will be Mount Holyoke. And Mount Holyoke became one of the famous Seven Sisters. So these were the women's colleges that are kind of located in the general area of New England. But clearly, this was one of her objectives. She wanted, you know, to promote women's education if she could. She also was very much a proponent of the protection of women's rights and property. Now, when a woman got married in those days, they called it civil death. And that just, it kind of, I mean, it's harsh when you think about it. So when a woman married a man, she basically died as a civil person. And what that meant was that all of her rights were given to her husband, all her properties and everything. And, you know, I don't know if you have any sense of it. Just imagine, you know, like how this would set up for some male gold digger. He finds a rich woman, he marries her, and overnight, all of her wealth is his wealth, basically. And, you know, it's almost like he could dump her and get away with it. And the only way that that woman could be protected in her property rights is if her father or her husband had designated those properties to her. And, you know, there were many far-seeing individual men who simply realized that this could be abusive in this situation, so they would write like into their will, this property is to go to my daughter and no one else, and she controls it all through her entire life. Though I shouldn't say I went too far there. Routinely what would happen is that the property would be controlled by the husband in marriage, but not, he couldn't dispose of it, you know, and when he died, it reverted to the wife routinely. So, I mean, this is a basic kind of, you know, problem for women, that they lost all of their rights as a civil person, basically, in the moment of their marriage. And she definitely was one person who said, no, that's not right. Women need to be protected in terms of their rights and their properties. And although, of course, you know, I can't take a direct line from Abigail Adams to this, but this is like on your way to the California equal property laws, you know, that in any marriage, of course, you know, the properties are to be divided equally among the two people if there is a divorce or something like that. So we're heading in a direction where women's property is indeed going to be much more protected. Now, the final thing that I want to know that she promoted, and I would love to be able to tell you that she promoted women's right to vote, because it just seems like that's where this should be going, right? But she didn't, and I find that kind of as a tragedy. She couldn't quite see that far, you know. I don't think that, you know, she was part of her age in her own kind of way, where men absolutely dominated politics, and tragically she couldn't see beyond it. It's gonna be her daughters, you know, it's gonna be the next generation that begin to think that, but it doesn't quite come with Abigail. But she did promote this particular notion, which I do want to highlight for you. She wanted women to be what she called mothers of the Republic. She wanted them to be the mothers of the Republic. So she saw the women as the primary agent who would teach their children about the values of the Republic. And part of this is a little bit sad to me, because really what she was saying was she wanted the mothers to teach their sons. You know, she wasn't quite so focused on teaching the daughters, but the mothers would teach their sons all of the notions of republic and representative government. And to say that she was successful at this, of course, is an incredible understatement. Abigail Adams, for a very long time, was the only woman in the history of the United States of America who was not only the wife of a president, but would also be the daughter messed that up. The mother of a president too. So her son was John Quincy Adams, and Adams will be, I am pretty sure, the sixth president of the United States of America. So, she upheld her notion of being, of course, the mother of the republic. But what she did was set the stage, of course, for generations of American women afterwards to begin to try to assert more and more of their rights. But I do want you to know that in the moment of the revolution, this was a revolution for white men. It's going to take a long time before the impacts will radiate out to more people, including African Americans, other minorities, and including women, okay? And when we come back, we will start on the dynamics of growth in antebellum America. All right, ciao.